My presentation will be on children's digital literature. First, I'll be talking about digital literature versus print books. Digital literature needs technology, which can be extremely expensive, but ebooks, website subscriptions, and apps are often less expensive than the print books. There's also so many choices on these websites or these apps for our books. There's so many more than you might have in your library, so it's a great way to expose students to many different types of books. Characteristics of digital literature: they often have interactive components where the students can move the objects around, alter the story. There's animation, there's movement and sound. There's a lot of sound effects, so if someone's walking, you might hear their footsteps. Just another element that kind of brings the story to life. But it also takes away the element of imagination for students, because as they're reading, they're not picturing the scene in their head, they're seeing the scene instead how the author had planned for it to look. There's also apps. This is another way that students can get digital literature. Some apps use the microphones and cameras on the devices so that students can personalize the stories or even create their own stories using their voices or their pictures. Apps also often come with games and activities that go along with the story to help practice the lessons that were learned or the ideas that were learned in the story. One example of an app is the Barefoot World Atlas app. In this app, students can touch parts of the map to find geographical or social information about the location. Also, there's a lot of questions about ebooks versus digital books. Ebooks are just something that is a book that is scanned and put onto a device, some type of technology. This book, the literature isn't altered in this book. But for digital books, there's an added interactive component to the story. Often the story is changed a little bit, and or the story could just be developed only for digital literature. Here are some examples of places that students can go to find these stories. Storyplace would be an example of digital literature that is created just for the devices. These are not books that were previously created and then made into digital stories. They're just digital storybooks. This website is particularly for preschool students, but there's many other websites just like it for the older students. I'll just show you one example of a book. This is Bananas for Lunch.
Bananas for lunch.
So for this book particularly, someone is reading the words, so this might be for a student that doesn't know how to read yet. So the person reads for them, they can follow along, and then they can move their cursor around to kind of manipulate the objects in the story.
A fat little monkey had bananas for lunch. He peeled one and ate one. Munch, munch, munch.
So as you can see, there's a lot of movement that students can read, listen, and also see what's going on in the story. The other website is the Children's International Digital Library, which has so many books. There's books in many different languages, so if you have an ELL student, you might want to find a book that's in their native language. But for our case, I'll find an English book to give you an example of what it might look like. You can use this on maybe a Promethean board to show it really big for students and read together, or maybe students read the book on their own devices but it's just a great way to find a collection of many different types of books that you might not already have in your library. So there's a lot of debate on whether or not digital literature or print books are better for learning for the students. I read an article that was called Digital Literature on the Move that explained that the real learning comes after the students have read the book online, as a digital version, or as a print version. And the teacher uses probes to help along discussion about the book, about the lesson, about how it affects the characters, and all these different elements of the book. The students aren't going to learn just by reading it, but by discussing it. So it's really important for teachers who are using digital literature to still bring their students back together and discuss what they've read. So that's my presentation.